Across the Northeast, snow, ice, rain taking hold, almost a foot of snow.
Doesn't take that long to really feel this cold weather, just a few minutes, and it's literally painful on your...
A global warming Scientologist had to be removed from his frozen vehicle after days of being trapped. Poetic justice much?
Because for the past 16 years, there has been no warming to speak of.
You're listening to Mind the Gap, a podcast about science, skepticism, and trivia, bridging the gap between your minds and everything else. I'm Alyssa Chenery.
I'm Keegan Gwydolyn.
And I'm Mackie Drew.
And our show today is called Whirlwind, our show about climate change. We'll discuss our most recent data about it, current political response, and what we can do about it. To start, I want to clear up the myth that has been generated by the recent cold snap in Canada and some of the US, which is that cold weather disproves climate change. Surprisingly, this myth kind of pops up every winter. In reality, the especially cold weather we've been experiencing is driven by climate change. Extreme warming in the polar north has caused cold air from the north to drop down in what's called a polar vortex. A study done by Jennifer A. Francis and Stephen J. Vavaris called Evidence Linking Arctic Amplification to Extreme Weather in Mid-Latitudes, which was published in 2012 actually, theorizes that cold air from the north will continue to move down south as climate change continues. I believe Keegan is going to discuss more of our current research.
Yes, I will. So when we discuss climate change, it's important to discuss those terms individually. We obviously know what change means, but I'll get into that a little bit later. In terms of climate, though, we have to understand that this is distinct from weather, and that's a common mistake that people make. So climate is very mathematical in a sense. It's a statistical average of the variation in weather over long periods of time. I'm not talking about weeks or months or even years. I'm talking about, hundreds of years to millions of years. We're talking about a large expanses of geological time. And this is, of course, different from weather, where weather describes only short-term variations in stuff like temperature, humidity, atmospheric pressure, wind, precipitation, and other meteorological variables. So climate change is a significant and long-term change in weather patterns over lengths of time between decades and millennia.
On this, just a quick aside, you always hear on the weather, there's like, oh, these are record highs. But what they really mean for that is that the record high is in weather, not climate. So they'd say these are record highs, and what they literally mean is this is the hottest it has been ever recorded for this particular day in this particular for this year. It's not as astounding when you just think of it like that, but it sure makes for great news.
Yeah, sensationalism.
Yeah.
So obviously, the major debate, as with most things, is not centered around whether or not climate change occurs. It's centered around what causes it. And there are many factors that can and do cause climate change, and very few of them are what we call anthropogenic, or caused by humans. For instance, biotic factors can affect climate, and by biotic I mean pertaining to living things. So living things other than humans can cause major changes in climate. In fact, this is what occurred a few billion years ago when the oceans first filled with primitive cyanobacteria, which is an organism that produces oxygen through photosynthesis, and it populated our atmosphere with oxygen. It changed the atmospheric content and thereby changed the distribution of gases. And the gases, as I'll discuss, are very important for how much heat the Earth retains. So these organisms that produced the oxygen that enabled more complex life to develop also drastically affected the atmosphere and thus the climate. There's also a bunch of abiotic factors, so non-living factors. Things like solar variations. The sun goes through cycles of relative heating and cooling. as well as our distance from the sun varies slightly. There's also plate tectonics and volcanic eruptions and all sorts of things like that.
The tilt of the Earth?
Yes, exactly, the tilt of the Earth. And even our relative tilt of the Earth on what's called the precession can affect the climate. So, to give us a bit of history behind this, I'd like to tell you that for the past 650,000 years, there have been 7 cycles of glacial advance and retreat, and these are ice ages, essentially. The last ice age ended about 7,000 years ago, which is around the time that human civilization sprang up. So that's obviously a very significant event, right? Most of these changes over the past 650,000 years rather, were caused by variations in solar energy received by the Earth. So that solar variation, that cycle that the sun goes through, as well as the distance to the Earth, are the main things that cause those changes. And if you look at the graph, there's a very nice graph on NASA's climate change site. And it shows you the variations in temperature and carbon dioxide content of the atmosphere. And it's a very nice, very regular cycle until the 1950s. And when the 1950s roll around, you get a huge spike in carbon dioxide. And that correlates to the industrialization of our modern society. We started burning fossil fuels like coal, oil, and natural gas. And since then, the global carbon dioxide levels have been higher than for any preceding years out of those 650,000 that we know of. And the levels are still climbing. Now, how about we talk about what we know exactly? So for what we know that the Earth is getting warmer. This is known as global warming. That's the colloquial term for it, obviously. And again, this is one of those statistical, mathematical things that we know. So on average, the Earth is warming. Even though areas may be unseasonably cold at times, as Alyssa said, I mean, we recently got this huge polar vortex, and it made everything absurdly cold in southern Canada for a while. So it may be unseasonably cold, but it doesn't mean that the Earth, on average, on the whole, is getting warmer. Between 1906 and 2005, that's about as long as we've been keeping really good temperature records. The global average temperature rose by about 0.74 degrees Celsius. And that may not seem like much, but that's raising the temperature of an entire planet. The rate as well in the latter half of that period, so, for the past 50-ish years, was double the rate in the former half. So
that's not good.
Yeah, we're experiencing not only warming, but acceleration of the warming.
And that's definitionally exponential.
Yes, exactly. We know that for 1,000 to 2,000 years before 1850, we don't have great data on that, but from the best that we can do, the temperature barely changed, especially globally. I mean, there were some sort of small regional variations that you might hear about, like the medieval warm period and the Little Ice Age, which were, they only took place in a limited geographical area, and they were relatively, mild alterations in temperature. However, when we're talking about the Earth getting warmer, as I said, the entire Earth is getting warmer. That means we're heating the entire oceans, the entire Arctic. We're heating everything up. And in addition to this, despite the unusually low solar minimum we experienced, so in the normal cycle of the sun's life, it gets warmer and cooler, as I said, but sometimes it'll dip a little bit lower and sometimes it'll dip a little bit higher. Naturally, when it dips a little bit lower, we would
dip higher?
Yes.
Spike higher. How about that?
All right.
So when it dips a little lower, you obviously think that Earth's temperature is going to get a little bit cooler, right? We're getting less energy. But it just kept getting warmer between 2007 and 2009, which was that time of the solar minimum. Earth's temperature continued to rise, and in fact, it got faster. Secondly, we know that there are these gases called greenhouse gases. The most famous one you'll hear about is carbon dioxide, and these help trap the heat that is absorbed by the Earth. So you pump a bunch of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, and the solar light coming in to the planet bounces off the surface of the Earth. Some of it's absorbed and some of it's radiated as infrared heat, which is just, your typical heat, what you would think of as thermal heat. And that is sort of insulated by this carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxide acts like a blanket around the Earth. And it keeps all that heat in, prevents the planet from radiating it away, and that sort of accelerates the warming of our planet. We know that greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide trap heat, just the way a greenhouse would, and retain it on the planet. So the bottom line here is more greenhouse gases equals higher heat retention equals higher heat in the planet. So most of these facts are not debated by people. Most people. Even the far conspiracy theorists. Some of them I've heard say that we don't know that the climate's actually changing, but I mean the data is really, really strong there. What the major conspiracy theory people disagree with are that humans are the cause of the majority of these greenhouse gases and the majority of the warming. And unfortunately, it's looking more and more like that's the case. In fact, at this point, it's almost consensual between the climate scientists in the field. It's essentially confirmed that humans are the cause of the global warming we're seeing. People point to those, solar cycles that we saw in the past 650,000 years. They say, oh, this is just a normal variation in that cycle. But it's looking less and less like that's the case. So we essentially know that humans are the cause of the majority of the greenhouse gas in the atmosphere because we see that correlation, that really tight correlation between when we started burning fossil fuels. We started pumping all this carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. We see the rise in CO2 levels, and we see a corresponding rise in global average temperature. So this is basically as good data as climate research can get. And maybe the scariest thing we know is that in the past, climate change has occurred rapidly, over tens of years, not over hundreds or thousands or millions of years. This is something that could change geologically overnight. And that's a really scary thought, especially since our planet could be drastically different. The climate of our planet could be very different from it is today, in a generation or two.
Yeah, and how we adjust to that quickly.
Exactly. I mean humans,
we're smart, but
humans may fare the best, We're pretty good at adapting to change like that, but other species... But we need
animals and plants.
Yes, exactly. Other species, I'm not so sure. There are, apart from the really hard facts, there are a couple of very illustrative examples that we can point to as evidence for climate change. Number one is the increased temperature is causing sea levels to rise. And over the past century, sea levels rose 17 centimeters. Again, it doesn't sound like much, but we're talking about an increase in volume of the entire world's oceans. And the rate of rise in the past decade is double that of the past century. So this is, again, an accelerating rate of sea level rise. This is probably caused by ice sheets in the Arctic and Antarctic, and all over the world shrinking rapidly and melting and adding that volume of water to the oceans. And that's causing this huge imbalance in the oceans. And I mean, we could do an entire episode on ocean, like oceanography and how it affects temperature and climate and all that stuff. It's just absurdly complicated. The other major point is that on September 16th, 2012, we had the record low for Arctic sea ice. And so that means that we had the lowest amount of Arctic sea ice that we have ever seen in all of recorded history, ever since we've been looking at that. Overall, 97% of climate scientists agree that climate warming trends over the past century are anthropogenic, so caused by us. And it's no longer really a matter of debate. The world is getting warmer and we are to blame. And people are going to, some people are going to be shouting their protests, their objections at their podcasting device. But that's what the evidence suggests. Unfortunately, there are some irreversible factors associated with global warming. Even though we have, sort of come to this realization, there are certain initiatives. I think Mackie's going to talk about some of them. And, we're sort of doing what we can. We're really just slowing things down because there are certain irreversible factors. About 20% of the carbon dioxide emitted into the atmosphere will remain there for thousands of years. Some of it will get, taken up by plants that die, and it'll be put into the ground that way and sort of sucked out of the atmosphere. But this 20% is going to stay in the atmosphere, and that means that it's going to accumulate. And this accumulation can lead to what's called a runaway greenhouse effect, which is very, very bad. And I know Mackie's going to talk about that later, right? The second thing is the melting of ice sheets, extinctions, and loss of unique cultures. That's something we can't get back, right? We can't get back an extinct animal unless we can, work on our genetic cloning. And again, we are going to lose cultures that live on, islands that are swallowed by rising oceans. And that's the kind of stuff that you just can't replace. So overall, the outlook looks pretty grim.
Mm-hmm. And I am surprised because of how bad the outlook looks and how sure scientists seem to be and how on board scientists are with the idea of climate change, and yet our political response is lacking. And the layman who is not a scientist is not always on board with the ideas either.
Well, Alyssa, has a scientific consensus ever swayed the public's opinion?
Well, of course it has. It might take time, but especially with the amount of information that's available about it, and the effects that seem to affect pretty much everyone already. Why is there a discrepancy there? I don't know, maybe I'm being naive and people never listen to scientists, but I still found it fascinating, nonetheless. And to kind of background you on it, I want to just start with the 19th century, because back then we were only beginning to theorize that the Earth's climate may have changed in the past. The ancient Greeks, of course, knew, but we'd forgotten that.
The ancient Greeks knew everything.
Yeah, I know. We continued developing our theories around this, and then by the late 19th century, some scientists proposed the idea that humans' release of carbon dioxide could change the climate. Then, during World War I, Milutin Milanovic, as a prisoner of war, spent his time devising his theory of previous ice ages based on the tilt of the Earth, solar output, and a few other things. In 1972, his theory was proven accurate by ocean core samples, as explained by Hayes, Imbrie, and Shackleton in a paper. Then in the 70s, scientific opinion began to sway towards an agreement about warming climate change. And then in the 90s, consensus was reached, like Keegan said, partly due to computer models and because we had such a large body of evidence at that time. Basically, everything Keegan said was already agreed upon.
It was really helpful that they've been keeping track of weather for so long. Like, compared to other things, it's like the most important thing. Meteorologists, I give them some trouble
credit?
Sometimes, but I got to give them some credit. They've been doing a good job for 100 years now.
Well, it seems like all of the observational sciences, like meteorology, astronomy, people keep really good records. Like, we know exactly what was happening in the sky in terms of, where the planets were, where the stars were, what was going on for thousands of years.
Yeah, it is pretty impeccable. And because of all that great, previous record keeping, most scientists were on board by the 90s. Of course, there was a minority of scientists who actually thought that the Earth would cool in the 70s, and their voice was a little bit exaggerated. But some of the modern climate change deniers will still quote those scientists. But of course, our understanding has greatly deepened since then. But it begs the question, why has political response and popular opinion been so slow to turn? Considering there was a gathering of scientists in 1988 called World Conference on the Changing Atmosphere, Implications for Global Security, and they resolved that the Earth should reduce its carbon emissions by 20% below the 1988 level by 2005, which obviously did not happen. And then, more recently, the Kyoto Protocol has also been a smashing failure in North America. Canada withdrew from it in 2011 because we'd made a commitment to reduce our emissions by 6%, but actually increase them by 17%.
Aww.
I know.
I hate having this conversation because I feel such shame.
I mean, I think people tend to focus on the fact that we withdrew from the protocol, but it makes sense because there was no way by 2011 we could actually hit our target.
Well,
we should have been working on it before. I wouldn't blame the current government.
We should have just stopped selling fossil fuels.
On top
Cold
of that,
turkey.
On top of that, our current leader, Stephen Harper, didn't go to the Copenhagen Accord. He didn't even show up.
Yeah.
So that's a big issue too. I have a great story about that. I'll tell you later. Anyway.
All right. Well, we can spread the blame just a little bit around. I mean, the U.S. signed it but never ratified it because their Senate didn't accept it. Mostly because it didn't ask developing countries to reduce their emissions, and it would have been, in their view, harmful to their economy. However, sorry.
I buy that. No, that makes sense. Because we had all the benefits of working with fossil fuels and that, you know.
I'm going to rip your idea to shreds in,
you think?
like,
all right.
30 seconds.
We'll
Just
see.
let me...
All right, go for it.
Speaking of the Kyoto Protocol, there have been some successes. The European Union as a whole is right on track with their targets. Some countries are a little bit off, but most are well below. And of course, there's been a lot of other non-binding agreements that have been made by Canada and other countries which aren't quite on board with the Kyoto Protocol. Notably, an agreement was made in 2011 in Japan during a UN conference that the countries there would devise an agreement by 2015, and then that agreement would come into effect by 2020, which many scientists, and especially the German media, call this out as like way too little, way too late. And during this, India and China made statements that suggested that the international community should recognize that more developed countries like Britain and the US have contributed the most to global warming, like Mackie was saying, and should be held accountable for their role as heavy contributors. Of course, I think it's important to keep in mind that according to a report by the ICCG and Karina Hitaya, that China surpassed the US in emissions. And India was the 5th largest contributor by 2008. So they might say that we've had the benefit of producing carbon for a long period of time, and that's true. But China is still the largest contributor, and India is not far gone.
Was that the rebuttal?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. No, I guess we were using different words. When you said developed country, I thought you meant like little itty bitty ones, like, you know.
Oh no, the
Liberia.
little itty bitty ones don't even contribute to carbon that much.
No, yeah, I'm just saying like we shouldn't be too hard on Liberia and Nigeria and, you know.
Oh gosh, no.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I was going for. When you say China, I'm not thinking developing. I know it is, but that's not what I'm going to.
You're not thinking. No, fair. One of the things that has been theorized is that every person on Earth should be allowed a 2-ton budget of carbon. And of course, plenty of developing countries fall so way below that. And other countries like China or the US, Canada, go way above that. The US has 20 tons per person. So, I mean, it's not fair to say that small developing countries, which are already much under the allotted budget, should fix what they're not doing. How would you even do it? I don't know.
Guns, lots of guns.
Well, the thing is that these fossil fuel energies are very cheap comparatively. So the developing nations kind of need those. And they're not going to be able to, you know, develop if they have to do everything with solar or wind or even nuclear. It's like that stuff costs way too much money, and it's not efficient enough for them to be able to support it. So, I mean...
Well, that's true, and does need to be addressed in a way. But there's also a consideration in political science that maybe progress doesn't have to come about the same way that it did in developed countries, and that developing countries aren't necessarily going to have to follow the path of the Industrial Revolution and Britain in order to become more economically stable and to have a better standard of living.
No doubt, but we know it works, so I think that's what they're going to think, you know?
Yeah, no.
They don't want to have to reinvent the wheel.
I just say that
I think they should try to reinvent the wheel. It'd be really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
We'll
Well,
come up with, see what they come up with.
I mean, at least for now, they don't produce as much carbon as we do, for the most part. Although climate change is going to affect them a lot more than it will affect people in developed countries. I mean, the effects of raising sea levels, more natural disasters, shortages of food and water, they can't fix that. They can't, they don't have the resources to import food, fix broken infrastructure all of the time. And because they generally contribute the least to carbon, it's unfortunate that they're going to be affected the most. It's up to more industrial countries to reduce the problem, but they don't have the same immediacy and political drive. If New York ends up flooding, one day the U.S. can handle that. A developed country, one of their major cities flooding, not going to happen. Really dire problems are going to arrive only in the global north after it might be too late to stop them. Of course, some people look beyond the national and the international scales to make policy for global warming. There is a C40 Cities Climate Leadership Group, which is actually now 63 cities, including some that are largest in the world and others that are smaller than 3 million people, but which have shown innovation in reducing emissions. Their website kind of lists 8 main ways of addressing climate change, like converting roof space to green space, using LED lights, having docked ships use onshore power supply instead of their own internal supply, just among like a whole bunch of other solutions. Yeah. And it's good that there are some successful coalitions. But I was reading this really interesting article by David L. Levy and Daniel Egan, which was applying Gramsci, who's a famous political theorist, applying his theories to the issue of climate change. In one portion, they talk about how climate change challenges the pillars of political control or hegemony in our societies. Like oil and fuel companies obviously feel threatened. There's no guarantee that they would be the most successful companies in the market for a low-emission technology. And there's also like an ideological threat to the idea of the personal car. Also, the threat of climate change strengthens a lot of the institutions that get in the way of corporations. Call for international response strengthens the United Nations and non-governmental organizations, or NGOs, as they're colloquially called. National and municipal governments are also called upon to regulate and interfere with corporations, and of course they feel threatened by that. The same article I read addresses then the Global Climate Coalition, which is mainly a collection of U.S. corporate leaders, and their attempts to support the denial of climate change through press releases, appeals to the American Congress specifically. Similarly, if you hear someone talking about scientists fudging numbers in climate reports, that probably traces back to these 3 industry organizations which challenge the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's top scientists, and they're called the IPCC for short. And they said that they'd misrepresented their certainty in their 1996 report, which turned out to be a completely unsubstantiated claim. And it didn't affect the IPCC's international reputation, but it really did affect U.S. domestic policy. It actually produced quite a backlash too, though. And a Ford executive said that they would be less strident in the future by their attempts at challenging climate change. So I thought that that was a pretty telling quote. And I think it's easier to see where it comes from, with corporations spreading, especially in the U.S., which just seems to leak everywhere else, propaganda about, no, of course it's not, or scientists are lying, or they're unsure about this or that. And originally when I was writing this, I was planning on focusing a lot more on the history of climate change denial and like individuals who do it, or etc. But I think that we like to point the finger at people who don't believe in climate change and laugh at them, and like we should, because it's ridiculous. But what's more ridiculous, to not believe in climate change or to be fully aware of it and not do anything about it? I think pointing at deniers is just one way of pushing the responsibility off of ourselves. Like, while educating them is a good idea, and I think we should do it, we should all get together and maybe scold them a little bit more after we've contributed to actually fixing the problem.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
That's fair.
It's just my 2 cents, really.
I agree with you functionally, but I love winning an argument, so...
And it's an easy argument to win, isn't it?
So I'm going to just say, yes, fine, I'll do something, but no, I want to fight the denialists.
Just get more plants, really. Lots of plants. That'll help.
So, you guys have been sufficiently depressing. I'm going to be overly optimistic. I'm going to maybe look a little bit too much on the bright side, so to speak. And I'm going to talk about how to actually deal with climate change in both the preventative measure and the reversal measure. So, first off, like Keegan said earlier, we want to avoid primarily the runaway effect, which is when we get to a certain threshold where the where the warming is actually causing by some mechanism causing the problem to get worse. So by somehow the warming is causing more greenhouse gases to be released and the problem to get worse, and basically it's a feedback loop. So it gets worse and worse and worse. And there's
in our case, it's carbon dioxide bubbles trapped in ice. Once you get to a certain point, the warmth causes the melting of the ice, which releases more carbon dioxide.
The heating will cause more like forest fires, and then those will release more carbon dioxide, which will then heat them more and cause more forest fires, and yeah.
And a third example, the cold water is better at dissolving CO2 in it. So you have when you warm the water, it actually releases CO2 that's stored currently dissolved in ocean water.
Oh, you're kidding.
So
That's awful.
so we have carbon dioxide stored pretty heavily all the way down from the surface of the ocean to the bottom of the ocean. But as we warm the water, the surface gets hotter. It goes down further, getting hotter, and it releases more CO2. So we have several different mechanisms, at least just a few there, and I'm sure many more that cause the problem. So we have to come up with a solution not only to stop what we're doing now, prevent what we're currently doing, but more importantly, reverse what we've already done. So I mean, first off, we had a similar climate, more like a geoengineering problem in the 70s, which was we had an ozone hole, or two actually, at either pole, and that what that was caused by was CFCs released into the atmosphere, which is chlorofluorocarbons. They were used in aerosols, so they were destroying the ozone layer, and they were causing holes to be formed, and that was allowing more UV radiation, causing plants to be damaged and causing cancer risk to go up. A lot of people conflate these two issues when they're really fairly separate. Not so separate, sadly. But the thing is, we fixed that problem. It's going to be fine. Like it's being repaired now, and it's going to continue to be naturally just fixed over time, and it's set to be just as good as it was in the next 30 years. But the problem is, ozone is a greenhouse gas, so that fixing that issue actually led to further climate change, and it's going to continue to make things worse. So just an example of how a fix can go wrong. But the first, obviously, primary mechanism for stopping climate change is reducing the amount of greenhouse gases you create. Although this isn't a very convincing thing for me, we've proven time and time again we aren't very good at that. I think there are better ways, and regardless, we're going to have a base amount of carbon we always release that we're going to have to learn how to deal with. More so than actually just stopping it. So we produce carbon dioxide just from breathing and walking, and any industry in any capacity is going to produce carbon dioxide no matter what. So we can act to get rid of it as best we can, but we've got more important issues, I think. But first off, I want to talk about some difficult problems for actually determining what is worse or better. For instance, organic food is much, much worse for producing greenhouse gases, which most people wouldn't think, because they think, oh, it's organic, it's nature, therefore, blah, blah, you know how the mindset works. But really, it's super high maintenance. There's much more care. There's more vehicles to spray with organic pesticides much more frequently, and you need more space for the same amount of food. So there's a lot of issues with producing organic food versus, traditional. I guess what would you call it? Good
mainstream
agriculture.
Food.
Local farming also tends to lead to these issues because their distribution methods are so flawed. There's a lot of crossover where you could produce the same amount of food, but everybody's distributing them with different trucks. So you're coming into huge increases in the amount. So these are things, what I'm going over here is counterintuitive issues, the ones where we're being fooled because we think it's better, which is sort of a part of my thesis about why I think the prevention isn't maybe the best way to go with this. First main thing, stopping deforestation. That is a good preventative measure. Deforestation, obviously, trees breathe in carbon dioxide, incorporated into their structure, and they breathe out oxygen. So, and
then when the trees die, they
create a carbon sink.
Yeah. So the carbon is stuck in the form of those dead trees, and it's not floating around in the atmosphere.
Exactly. So you're producing a huge, like it's just, there's nothing bad about these trees being around. So if you and if you do cut down the trees, then actually cutting them down and processing them to be made into things actually creates more carbon dioxide as well. So it's a double problem to cut down trees. So that's a really good way. That's not necessarily it's partially cutting down on our carbon dioxide production, but more so it's about keeping things around that help mitigate the problems that we're creating all the time, regardless. A big thing too is we need the whole world on board. You guys talked about this a lot. Whether it's the very industrialized countries or the developing nations, blah blah blah. And the thing is, like, even if Canada was to become completely carbon neutral, that's only 1.82% of the carbon dioxide emissions. That's not even gonna touch it because other countries are gonna continue to increase. So we need the whole world to get on board, and there's a huge economic problem with that. First off, you can't get everybody to get along. And if only one country does it, then they might be putting them at an economic disadvantage, putting their own restrictions on themselves.
Well, or they might be positioning themselves better for the future when fossil fuels run out, or when the problem gets so bad that everyone else is like, we better copy them. So I don't think it will always necessarily be an economic disadvantage.
It will be, I think, in the short term.
Oh, for sure.
An economic disadvantage.
Is that not how most politics and economics is done, short term, sadly?
Yeah, unfortunately.
which is the main issue, right? They're thinking about, how can I get elected next term? Or how can I look like a great CEO until I leave, But another great thing that you can do is for offsetting the carbon produced is living in cities, which is not often seen as a great thing. People always complain about cities growing and their farmland being taken over, whatnot. At least they do around here.
And they talk about the pollution produced by cities, right? Smog stuff and all that.
And the thing is that's true. There is a concentrated amount of pollution and smog in the city, but it's less than if they were all spread out. It's about 30%. Well, for instance, in New York, a citizen tends to produce 30% less carbon than the USA average because it's concentrated infrastructure, right? It allows for less redundancy in the systems. You don't have to
obviously, you've got good public transit, you've got people walking places instead of driving, all that kind of thing.
And you can make any kind of regulatory changes quicker in a city than you can anywhere else, because rather than changing 30 different regions and for like 30 people each, depending on how big the region is, you can change one thing and you can see quick results, hopefully, depending on the regulation. But even with this, obviously the problem isn't totally solved because we still have we still produce greenhouse gases. We still have the ones we produced in our crappy years. And so we need to figure out a way to restore balance. And that brings me to reversal. So this is something I really thought was amazing. And there's more amazing to come, I'm sure. But first off, I'd just like to mention again that you can't really reverse some things like the species lost or the countries lost, but from going underwater or being eradicated, or people dying from hurricanes that wouldn't be around if it wasn't for the increased temperature. I think that a really great mechanism, and probably the one we're going to go to first, is producing carbon sinks through many different measures. And we're doing this now through planting trees, which is obviously great. We talked about that. Or carbon capture and storage, which is amazing. Okay, so you know how they extract gas from the ground? There's usually a big bubble of pocket, and there's hard rock around it. So they poke it, they extract it, and then they leave a big empty ball of nothing down there. Right. So what we do is we build machines to scrub carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and then pump it down into those holes that we've taken the gasoline from. And we're like, okay, just plug it back up. We'll put it back.
Is it just carbon dioxide gas?
Yeah. Carbon dioxide gas, or there are some people who want to turn it back into, liquid forms. And they have bacteria and stuff to do that.
It's also called carbon sequestration, right?
Yes,
someone's
exactly.
more familiar with that term.
That is. I like carbon capture storage, but the carbon sequestration is kind of hard to pronounce, honestly. But yeah, it's and there's obviously the main issue is how efficiently can we take it from the air, and how efficiently can we store it. The storage method is poetic, so I'm totally fine with that. Isn't it, right? We're literally undoing the problem. But
We're just putting it right back.
And some effects of, some of these runaway effects are actually good in that the ice caps will actually, when they melt, they can actually start storing carbon again in a better way. So like
as cold water.
As cold water. So you've got that effect. That's okay. That's helping us now, but it's not going to last forever, obviously.
Yeah.
As the extreme heat subsides from us fixing these issues, once we've started to reverse them, then you start to lose have less problems with the runaway effects. So you won't get as many fires, you won't get all these. You'll once the ocean starts cooling again, it'll start to store more carbon dioxide. So we can actually get a good runaway effect to restore us. So we can be quicker, we can repair it quicker by getting these effects reversed, because they work in both directions, right? If we do lose the ice caps completely, we're going to actually have to do a lot more to compensate, because the white surface of the ice caps, as that melts, we lose less white space. And you might know that white reflects light while black absorbs it. So the ocean, when looking from above, is black. It absorbs almost all the light and turns it into heat, where the ice caps, when sun reflects off of that, it's like a giant mirror shooting light and heat back into the... Yeah, so when we lose the ice caps, we lose a great benefit to our prolonged existence. But worst case scenario. So this is we have done everything and we suck. There is a solution. There is a way to fix the problems regardless, except it comes with some costs. This is a geoengineering solution. It's called stratospheric sulfate. Oh my god, let me just try that one more time. It's called stratospheric sulfate aerosols, and it is basically putting any sulfur compound into the stratosphere, and it's like simulating a volcanic eruption. Enough sulfur will dim the sun. And so it's like the Matrix. So you're dimming the sun, and you're stopping the heat from getting in the first place. Stopping the light from getting in the first place.
That just seems like a bad idea.
Yeah.
Here, let me list the side effects. It will work. Keep that in mind. Throw out all these side effects. This will stop the heating if we must. But it will cause drought, ozone depletion, which could help too, tarnished skies, which is basically it will look withered, it will look less blue, it'll look brown and sad and dystopian, and it'll create it creates less light for plants, so the plants may die to some degree, and they would incorporate less carbon dioxide into their system, and there'd be less light for solar energy. So there's a lot of geoengineering solutions for this, for the whole global warming, just in case. Let's have something back up. One of them is painting all the roofs white, which is a great idea, by the way.
That's brilliant.
I don't know why we're not doing that, but yeah,
it's so low tech.
Yeah, it's true.
Great, yeah.
Government mandate. Everyone by 2 weeks from now has to paint their roof white.
It's
Problem
amazing.
Solved.
I love it. It's just so simple and dumb. I just love it. It's just too much. But this is this is a world problem, and we're all gonna have to get behind a world solution. So one country might be doing a lot of good, but the others are clearly not doing enough. So, I mean, we really need to work on some of these prevention, reversal, or backup mechanisms. Otherwise, we're going to be coming into some of the things Keegan mentioned, and we don't want Keegan to be right.
Well, with that, we'll go on to the game section, where I'm sure he's going to be wrong at least once. So welcome to the game section. We're going to start it off with Gap Facts this week, where we give you guys bite-sized pieces of trivia that you can tell your friends. Keegan, you want to go first?
Sure. So most of us have 2 nipples, but about 5% of the population have 3 or more nipples. 5%.
5? That cannot be right. Are you sure?
5%.
So any random time I'm on the bus, I'm with an odd number of nipples.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yep. Chances are. And that's 3 or more. So you can have like 5 nipples. Like you can have, I don't know what the maximum number of nipples you can have is, but
Well,
you can have
I mean,
a lot of nipples.
We can look to nature. How many nipples are there maximum on a species? That would be a great piece of trivia.
No, I bet that Guinness has a record. Don't worry. They keep track of ridiculous things like that. My fact is that Duchess Melissa Rinaldi invented ceiling fans at about 1860. They're not sure. I don't know why they're not sure, but they're not. But they were initially powered by running streams in a series of belts.
Oh, that's nice.
And they caught on in great popularity because you could supply a whole bunch of fans that way. So like stores would be like, oh, we can do our whole ceiling with just like a stream. So yeah.
That's nice.
Oh, that is good. Mm-hmm. You know, I was gonna say a different fact, but I'm gonna say a new one because that reminded me of something. The first elevator factory had only 1 floor.
And a really big ceiling, I could only assume.
They didn't build buildings that far. They actually, before this, they had elevators, but nobody wanted them because they were so terrifying, because they only had 1 rope, and if it broke, everybody died.
Well, I can see why.
That seems like a very easy fix, though.
This elevator factory produced the first safe elevators with 2 safety mechanisms: a mechanical braking mechanism, where if it falls in any rushed way, it'll automatically brake with brackets, metal brackets, and it also used a an airtight shaft, which created an air cushion should it fall.
So my quiz is going to be called...
Oh, don't you have a fact? Oh, you gave the fact.
I said,
Sorry.
yeah. Duchess Melissa Rinaldi.
Yep,
Don't
gotcha.
you forget. No.
I said that was nice.
So my quiz this week is called Climate or Change. And before we start, I want to remind you that closest without going over rules will apply for many of these questions.
Okay.
So what's going to happen is that I'm going to start with a climate question, but whoever wins this next one will be able to pick climate or change question.
Okay, all right. I'm so glad to be on the receiving end of one of these quizzes. Okay, let's go.
Yeah, ready? Okay. So the climate question, number 1, is which species is
So hang
considered...
on. Are we answering in turn, or is it like whoever answers first?
Whoever answers first.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Please wait until I finish the whole question.
Okay.
So, which species is considered to be more endangered according to the ICUN scale? That is the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. The 3 animals are cheetah, polar bear, or Bengal tiger.
Polar bear.
Bengal tiger.
Bengal tiger is correct.
Yes! All right.
Polar bear is considered to be vulnerable, so is a cheetah. A Bengal tiger is endangered. The next step is critically endangered. None of them are.
I've never seen a tiger, so...
I've never seen a cheetah. I've seen tigers.
You don't...
Turner
You've seen
Zoo,
a
man.
tiger, Mackie. I was with you when
Turner
you saw a
Zoo.
tiger.
Yeah.
Oh, I have seen a tiger. I just meant in the wild.
Have you seen a
Well,
polar
you've
bear
seen
in the
a polar
wild?
bear?
I have some interesting weekends.
Wow.
I hunt them for fun. I mean...
All right.
What? All right.
So, Mackie, do you want a climate or change question?
I'm not sure what these entail, so I guess I'll
Yeah.
have to go with... I'll go with a climate question.
All right. The climate question is, in which country in the world would you find coastal wolves?
Coastal wolves.
Country?
That would be Canada.
British Columbia.
Oh, well...
It is British
Mackie said
Columbia.
It is British Columbia.
I knew that.
Canada.
That's why I said Canada, because British Columbia is not a country.
Yeah, I
It's not.
want to
All
be
right.
specific.
I'm going to have to give it to Mackie.
Damn it.
So you guys know... they have a coastal temperate rainforest in which the wolves
Yeah.
inhabit. They're the coolest animal. They're my favorite.
Oh, yeah. I think
Alright.
we talked about this one week, didn't we?
I think it came up in one of my quizzes.
Yeah, that's that species. That's why I knew it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Keegan, for the answer.
So, Mackie, do you want a climate or a change question?
I'm going to sure go with change, see what happens.
Okay. So the question here is, and remember, closest without going over, what's the highest face value of a coin ever made?
Oh, no. Okay, because Zimbabwe had that thing where they were having a problem with the hyperinflation.
100.
That was bills. I'm going to say it's going to be 5,000.
Well, actually, 6 years ago, Canada made $1 million coin.
I was closest without going over. Yeah. Oh,
It also is the
Keegan.
highest percentage of gold ever achieved in a coin.
I knew
Oh,
that.
99.999%.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Canadian Mint totes that like it's the only thing they can say. Isn't that right?
So you're both wrong. So I'll go with another another change
Wait,
question.
I was the closest without going over, though.
Oh, right. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, Mackie. Climate or
Damn it.
change?
Oh, wow, I'm killing him this time. How many questions are there?
It depends on whether or not you pick climate or change.
Oh,
I have a certain amount for both, of course.
okay. I'm winning now, so I'm gonna try to deplete them. I'm gonna go with change again.
Okay. So the second question is, how much does that coin weigh?
That same coin?
Yes. Please feel free to answer in kilograms or pounds.
Oh, jeez.
3.2 kilograms.
Closest without going over. 3.3 kilograms.
Oh, you piece
Guys, it weighs 100 kilograms.
of... Well, I don't
It's
know.
the
Closest
size
without going over.
It's the size of a motorcycle tire. It's 220.46 pounds.
The thing is,
That's
it's a
even-
face value thing. I can print any number on the coin I
no,
want.
exactly.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
it's worth $1 trillion. Like, it, could be,
In fact,
it doesn't have to be
it's the
correlative.
gold in it is valued at 4 million. I think it's 4 million.
And how much is the
So
coin
actually-
again? Sorry?
1 million.
What?
And the actual gold in it is worth 4.
That's a steal.
Exactly. But because it'll be a collector's, there will be 6 of them, and because it'll be collectors, I think they'll be selling it for over that, because
What?
eventually it will
Yeah, of
obviously be
course.
worth more. Yeah.
They'll-
Does,
they
like,
sell they sell it for at least the cost of gold at that point,
Yeah.
right?
I gotta say, I want to have it just to go into places and ask for change.
Well, if you don't want to do that and you want to keep it in your house, it also comes with a $10,000 stand.
Wow. Do you have to buy the stand separately, or do they throw that in?
Buy
I
two,
think you
get
have
the
to buy it
stand free.
separately. There's another accessory that comes along with it. I forget what it is.
They took so much time to
It's
make such a
crazy.
limited market for the coin.
I know.
Really- I think it's just
currency is the
a-
most fascinating thing.
I think it's an
really.
academic affair, you know? It's
Oh,
like,
it's
oh,
for just
look at
rich
how
people with
good
nothing
coins
better
we
to
can
do.
make.
Maybe. So Keegan,
Yes.
climate or change?
I'll go with change.
Change? All right. This theory, by Thomas Kuhn, famously questioned how progress is made in science, claiming that progress is not steady but arrives in leaps and bounds.
Oh, the theory? You want the name of the theory?
Yes.
Quantum leap?
Oh, I don't know.
Well, he's wrong, so you should guess,
Damn.
Mackie.
All right, can you say the question one more time?
Okay, this theory by Thomas Kuhn famously questioned how progress is made in science, claiming that progress is not steady but arrives in leaps and bounds.
Phyletic gradualism.
It's called
No,
the
that's-
paradigm shift.
Oh,
How
paradigm
would-
shift.
How would anyone know that?
Who was closer? Nobody. I'm just gonna pick a climate
Mine was the
question for you
opposite of the
guys.
truth. Yeah.
Which European country has reduced their emissions the most? Which is not the one with the lowest emissions, but the greatest reduction between 2008 and 2012.
Oh God, I used to know this too. I'm gonna say, just because I love it lately, Germany.
I will say Sweden.
Sweden is correct.
Come back from. Okay.
Yeah, you're tied up now, 2-2.
Oh, yeah.
Keegan, climate or change?
I'll go with climate.
Okay. What is mean global temperature
What?
What is mean global temperature right now? Celsius only, please, because I'm lazy.
Oh,
Okay. Now here's my thoughts.
11 Celsius.
I gotta say, I think it's higher than that. Is this closest without going over?
Yep.
11.1.
Bastard.
It's 14.6.
I was gonna say
and-
16 first. Okay, we're good.
And it was 13.6 in the 1800s. Just
I was right in the 1800s too.
So Mackie, I'm gonna ask the last change question. Sorry. This Greek philosopher, whose philosophy has been summarized as "you never step in the same river twice," and is famous for his doctrine of change. So which Greek philosopher is this?
I don't know.
Ancient Greek, I might add.
Plato, just cause.
Aristotle, just cause.
Heraclitus. Although Plato did do the summarization, so I guess I'll give it to Mackie.
Oh, come on.
He's winning anyway, 3-2. He won
Closest
anyway.
without going over.
I'm not going to tie you up. Well, there we go.
Right, great. Yeah,
Fun.
I won
That's
a
our
quiz.
show. Congratulations. All right, that's the show. Email your comments and questions to mindthegaphosts@gmail.com. Our next show will be called Chocoholics Anonymous. I'm excited. Subscribe to us on YouTube, iTunes, Double Twist, or the podcast feed of your choice. And also be sure to like or rate us depending on your platform. And thanks very much for listening.
I said it's getting hot in here, so take off all your clothes. I am getting so...
It's Getting Hot in Here, which I think was firmly established by Nelly in 2002, just before he requested that we take off all our clothes. And that, unfortunately, turns out to not be a particularly effective strategy to combat global warming. Fun, though.